Здравейте, приятели! В днешното видео ще разгледаме най-известният университет в света, а именно Харвард.
Човек, който е завършил Харвард в Харвард и след Харвард имаме в Харвард и казвам...
За мое голямо удоволствие имам приятел, който е професор тук и днес ще влезем на една негова лекция. Като негов студент или той самият, ако не е заед, ще ни разведе след това из кампусът на университета. Ще питаме студентите някакви въпроси за България. Нося си тук в джоба знамето, българското знаме, което развявах малко по-рано в моите видеа в Майами.
See, we're neighbors with Serbia, Romania, and Greece, and Turkey. And what is it?
You stupid.
It's in Europe. Italy?
Oh yeah, Italy.
We're gonna be pretty amazed if you know it.
В Майами никой не знаеше къде е България, тук в Харвард би трябвало са най-умните хора в света. Ще видим с какво разполагат в базата им и ще разберем знаят ли нещо за България. Като също така, приятели, искам предварително да ви се извиня, че видеото ще бъде на английски. В момента се намираме в Америка, ще ходим в Харвард, така че напълно нормално хората да говорят на английски. Така че, ако не знаете английски, извинявам се, ще слагам субтитри тук и там. Ако не знаете английски, крайно време е да го научите.
Hi everyone, I'm Tim McCarthy. I'm friends with Rado and we're here at Harvard University where I teach. I'm a professor here at the Kennedy School of Government and we're about to go into class. Harvard, which is the oldest university in the United States, and it's where I've been teaching for 25 years, and so we're gonna have a little bit of a tour of Harvard today, and it's great to be on here. So I teach classes on history and social movements, and I teach courses on leadership and communications and social change. I went to Harvard for college, and then I went to New York City and studied at Columbia University for my graduate degree, and I got a PhD in history. And then I came back to Harvard, and I've been teaching here for 25. This is my 25th year teaching here, even though I don't look that old. One of the things that we've been doing in this class is trying as best we can, understanding the limitations to this, of taking ourselves out of where we are right now and trying to get ourselves in the frame of mind of the context historically within which these people that we're studying were experiencing. We're going to fight back, and on Wednesday we're going to pivot and we're going to move into the Stonewall generation. We're going to talk about...
Yay! Thank you!
Have a great day. We'll see you on Wednesday.
My name's Jonathan Page, and I went to Harvard College, graduated in 2002, and then I worked at Harvard at the University Church between 2007 and 2010. So I have a lot of experience in the area, and I used to give a lot of tours of Harvard, so here we go.
He's the right guy.
Yeah, Harvard was the first college in the United States. It was founded in 1636, in October of 1636, which was just 6 years after people came to settle in this area around Boston. So the people who settled here were very religious, and part of their religion was they needed to make sure that they could train new ministers, and in order to train new ministers, they wanted to establish a college. The college back then, though, people went to college when they were much younger than they do now. So back then, people were generally graduating college at, say, age 18 or thereabouts, and then going from there. So Harvard College, again, was founded in 1636, although the first classes didn't start until 1638. And it's named after a guy named John Harvard, who died very young and was a minister over in Charlestown, which is about 5 miles from here. Didn't have any children, and he donated his entire book collection and his estate to the new college. And so the college was named after him, and hence the name Harvard College. It's a good question. I don't remember how old he was when he died. He was in his 20s, I believe, when he died. This part right here, again, is Harvard Yard. It's the oldest part of the campus. And in fact, where you're standing right now is where the original buildings from Harvard were back in the 1600s. So the oldest building on Harvard campus that's still here is around this corner here. It's called Massachusetts Hall, and it was built around 1720. So there's Massachusetts Hall right there. That building with the people outside of it. That's also where the president of Harvard University has his office, in the bottom floor. But the top floors are a freshman dormitory. So first-year students at Harvard live in that building, and it's a building that goes back to 1720. Most of the buildings here are all dormitories for first-year students. So your first year... Housing for first-year students, yep. So your first year at Harvard, you live in Harvard Yard, one of these dormitories here, and then once you get to your sophomore year, junior year, and senior year, you then move to one of 12 residential colleges, residential houses that you'll see. I'll take you to some of them in a little bit, but this is the oldest part of the campus.
Is it free for them to live here, or they?
So it's all part of the package. So you're required to live on campus your freshman year, your first year. So everyone who gets admitted, they have housing for you all 4 years if you want it, but they have housing. Certainly, you're required to stay on campus your first year as a student.
You're required. Okay.
So actually, this building right over here, Weld Hall, that's the building where John F. Kennedy, later president, was when he was a freshman, when he was a first-year student at Harvard. He lived in that dormitory right there.
Приятели, ако и вие искате да посетите Америка, да съберете страшно много спомени, да спестите доста пари и сте студент, може да отидете в най-близкият офис на Orange, като специално моите последователи могат да се възползват от отстъпка с промокод, който може да получите, като ми пишете на лично съобщение в Instagram. И газ към най-близкият офис на Orange да си изкарате едно брутално и незабравимо лято.
Yes, so the Harvard Kennedy School, named after John Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, the Kennedy School was established as a graduate school for political science and government, and still is one of the leading graduate schools in political science anywhere in the world. That's where we were earlier. So this building right here is University Hall. University Hall is the chief administrative building for Harvard College. So for the undergraduates, this is the chief administrative building. It's where the dean of Harvard College has his offices. So the undergraduate population is about 1,650 students per class. It's about 6,500 students total for the undergraduate. And there's probably about another 10,000 plus graduate students amongst all the different schools at Harvard. So Harvard has a very prominent law school, a very prominent business school, medical school. They have School of Public Health, again, the School of Government, and now they have an engineering school. And then obviously the Faculty of Arts and Sciences that trains people to get their PhDs. They also have a divinity school. Yes, so in order to be admitted as an undergraduate, they only admit, I think, something like 3% of the people who apply these days to get in. And you take a series of standardized tests in order to get in, plus they look at your grade point average, they interview you, and you have recommendations submitted by your teachers in high school and other people in your life. So this here is the John Harvard statue. So it purports to be a statue of John Harvard, although there are no known likenesses of John Harvard, so we don't actually know what John Harvard looked like. It was a statue that was done in the late 19th century and by a sculptor named Daniel Chester French. And Daniel Chester French is the same person who did the Abraham Lincoln Monument in Washington, D.C. It's his most famous sculpture. So that's the most photographed place at Harvard, yeah. Now, one of the funny things is that as Harvard undergraduates, there were at the time various things that Harvard undergraduates were supposed to do before they graduate, sort of joke type things. One of those things they're supposed to do is actually urinate piss on the John Harvard statue, which is one of the reasons why Harvard undergraduates never touch the statue. and I think it's funny that a lot of tourists do. So that building right there directly across is Harvard Hall. That's actually a classroom building. But immediately to the right is Hollis Hall. That's one of the oldest dormitories, and it's been a dormitory since it was constructed back in the late 1700s. So that area we're just in is called the Old Yard because it's the oldest part of campus. This is known as the New Yard. This is also called Tercentenary Theater, and it's called that because it's where they celebrated the 300th anniversary of Harvard in 1936. This is where all the Harvard commencements or graduations are. So when graduation happens for all the students at the university, it happens right here. And so from those steps are where the graduation speakers speak from. Probably most famously, George C. Marshall, when he was Secretary of State under Harry Truman, gave a commencement address at Harvard, and he chose that place to introduce what became known as the Marshall Plan, which is the American aid program that reconstructed Europe after World War II. And that speech was delivered from those steps right there. So right there is Seaver Hall. Seaver Hall is designed by one of the most famous American architects of the 19th century, a guy named Henry Hobson Richardson, who himself was a graduate of Harvard. And he developed his own architectural style known as Richardsonian Romanesque. And if you're familiar with architecture, the sort of arched columns and certain other features of it are typical of a Richardsonian building. Henry Hobson Richardson's most famous building is a church in Boston called Trinity Church in Copley Square. Behind us we have the church, Memorial Church. That's where I worked for 3 years. So Memorial Church was finished in 1932. It was a memorial to the World War I dead of Harvard. And when we go inside, you can see that. It also has the Harvard dead from World War II, World War I, World War II, and then Vietnam, Korea, and the Gulf War. And then opposite here is Widener Library. That's the central library on Harvard's campus. It contains 2.5 million books in it. Oh my God. It goes down several floors, million books. The entire Harvard College Library collection, I think, has something like 14 million books in it. Harvard is, I mean, there are a lot of interesting things about that building. That building was given by a woman in honor of her son, Harry Elkins Widener, who died on the Titanic in 1912. She was a fabulously wealthy person from Philadelphia and wrote the check for the whole building.
How much was the check? Do you have any idea?
I think it was,
money was different.
yeah, I'm trying to remember how much it cost. It was expensive. It was several $million to build back in 1915, so it was not cheap. And unfortunately, tourists can't go inside, but it's got some beautiful rooms inside.
Tourists cannot go?
Cannot go, yeah, unfortunately. Very touristy, very touristy. Well, it's the most famous university in America, so.
If not in the world.
If not in the world, yeah. So this is Memorial Church. This is the undergraduate, or the whole university church. As I said, it was built in 1932. It replaced an earlier church called Appleton Chapel. So you can see the organ in the back was actually a relatively recent organ that was built back around the year 2010, 2011. That's when it was installed. Again, all the World War II dead are on the wall here. You'll notice one of the dead in the class of 1904 is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was President of the United States during World War II. And because he died during the war, he was memorialized there. There's a plaque that memorializes John Harvard. See, he died in 1638. He was born in 1607. So actually he was 30 years old when he died. Here's the room to the World War I dead of Harvard. Originally, when the church was built, all the undergraduates had assigned seating in the church, and the undergraduates came through this room so they could see all of the dead and give honor to the dead of World War I. So this is the chapel where they have a daily prayer service. So ever since Harvard opened in 1638, every day of class they have a daily prayer service that begins the day. And so this space is used every single morning at 8:40 in the morning.
Still?
Still, every day during term. It's actually not a church, it's called Memorial Hall. It was built and given to Harvard by the alumni of Harvard in honor of the dead of the American Civil War, but only the Union dead, only those who fought for the northern side. Nowhere at Harvard, there were a lot of Southerners who went to Harvard before the American Civil War, and quite a few of them died in the American Civil War. And nowhere on Harvard's campus are they memorialized or remembered because they fought for the South.
Which year was the Civil War?
1861 to 1865. Unfortunately, it's not open to tourists. The main part of it is an amazing dining hall that looks like something out of Harry Potter. And that's where the freshmen eat meals. So we have to be quiet here, but here are the list of all the Civil War dead for the North. If you look in there. One of the things about Harvard history is that there's a long story around this, but in the 20th century, Abbott Lawrence Lowell, when he became president of Harvard in 1909, wanted to have all the buildings look like the old brick buildings. But then the president who was president of Harvard from 1953 to 1971, Nathan Pusey, loved contemporary architecture. So this building and this building were built while Nathan Pusey was president. So the far building there, it sort of is reminiscent of a Japanese pagoda. And it's where the philosophy department is housed. And again, as I said, this is where the architecture department, this is where the Graduate School of Architecture is housed in Gund Hall. They recently redid this museum and it cost like $300 million to renovate. That's the number that was cited to me. I hope it was less than that. Picture right here. Take a picture of this one. They can fly pretty quickly. Harvard there aren't really fraternities at Harvard. Instead, there are what is known as final clubs at Harvard. And final clubs are very elite. And if you've ever seen the movie The Social Network that shows some of the final clubs, one of the oldest final clubs is right here. It's called the AD Club. Final Club. It's a private men's social club. And this is gorgeous inside, very pretty.
Would this style part of the Harvard thing? Because
Pretty
there's
much,
so
yes.
many buildings.
So all these buildings here are all Harvard. So This is actually, so in the 19th century, in the late 1800s, the Harvard student body expanded rapidly. And the president at the time was a guy named Charles W. Eliot. And at that time, you had private entrepreneurs who built apartment buildings that were private apartment buildings for very wealthy Harvard students. And then when the next president came, he required students to live on campus, which bankrupted those private dormitories, and then Harvard bought them very cheaply, and then combined them together to form what became the house system. So coming up on the right is some of Adams House, which is one of these. It's a gorgeous house inside, but it's one of the 12 undergraduate residential houses or colleges where you stay sophomore, junior, and senior year. And they each have their own dining hall, their own library, their own gyms, all that kind of stuff. So Adams House, the house I was talking about, you can see it's under scaffolding. One of the things that Harvard is doing is Harvard is spending over $1 billion. I think it's several $billion renovating all the undergraduate houses. Several $billion. They're gutting all the buildings and redoing them entirely, and it's costing several $billions. They're very old buildings, and they have to gut the whole buildings and then reconstruct them. Very expensive architecture costs and engineering costs, and then all the undergraduates who would be in the house, Harvard needs to find space for them in Harvard Square and pay for that. So the whole process is very expensive. So this building right here is called the Harvard Lampoon. It's where the Harvard Comedy Magazine is, undergraduate comedy magazine. And people like Conan O'Brien, he was a member of the Harvard Lampoon. All the people who wrote the show The Simpsons and Family Guy, they were all in the Harvard Lampoon. People who write for the Today Show and all that. So some of the best comedy writers in America over the last 60 years have all been members of the Harvard Lampoon. The Harvard undergraduate dormitories, this one's called Lowell House. The President Lowell conveniently named after himself, his own family. So one of the neat things about Lowell House are the bells that are in the tower. Those bells, the original bells, came from the Danilov Monastery in Moscow. So the Danilov Monastery in Moscow is the oldest and most famous monastery in all of Russia. And when Stalin was leading Russia, of course, he was anti-Christian. And he had these famous bells that he was going to melt down and turn into cannons or something else. And an American was there who was a Harvard graduate who convinced Stalin to sell him the bells, and then he donated the bells to Harvard. And then after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia wanted the bells back because of these historic bells, and Harvard said, no, there are bells. And finally, about 15 years ago, a Russian oligarch paid to have exact replicas of the bells made. And then the original bells shipped over to Moscow, the new replicas put in, and then to have the monks come over and show the Harvard undergraduates how to play the bells, and the bells are still played every Sunday at 1 up in that tower.
Why would you put original ones back?
So again, this is where undergraduates live who are sophomores, juniors, or seniors at Harvard.
How many people you said are like 20,000 in total?
Probably 16,000 in total, something like that. 16 to 18,000 in total, but 6,500 undergraduates. This is the Charles River, named after King Charles I, who was King of England when Harvard was founded. Across the river is Harvard Business School, the most prominent business school in the world, where graduates have gone to be CEOs and major leaders in business everywhere. And then all along the shore from those towers, all the way down, is all Harvard up to there.
Give me an example of somebody.
Who went to the business school?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I mean, you name it. I'm trying to think of like which. I mean, you should go on the Wikipedia page of Harvard Business School and just see the enormous list of alumni who are graduates of Harvard Business School. It is a very wealthy place. The best food on campus is over at Harvard Business School by far. It's also very expensive to go to Harvard Business School.
How much it's very expensive? How much is a year in the business school?
Business school is probably between $80,000 and $100,000 a year to go. Yeah. No, so it's just 2 years you go. Business school is just 2 years.
They can make it back very fast.
Right, they can make it back quickly.
Oh, it's just 2 years. So 2 years and you graduate?
For business school, yes. But you already have to have a 4-year undergraduate degree to go to business school. And usually you work for several years before you go to business school.
So it's like master's?
It's a master's degree, yep. A master's in business administration, an MBA. So on that side of the river, on the Boston side of the river, Harvard bought several hundred acres of land, and they're building a whole new campus over there, especially in the sciences and biotechnology. So Harvard and MIT have a combined biotechnology research effort that develops some of the leading medicines anywhere in the world.
They have computer science.
Yeah, so the computer science is way over there.
They have basically everything.
Right.
That you can think of.
And Bill Gates gave the money for the computer science building. Bill Gates, who founded Microsoft, who was also a Harvard student.
He didn't. Did he go to Harvard?
He went to Harvard, but then he dropped out. He didn't graduate. But Mark Zuckerberg, who founded Facebook, went to Harvard.
Also didn't graduate.
He
Did he graduate?
I don't think so. I think he dropped out too.
He dropped out too.
Yeah. I guess a lot of people like to drop out of Harvard and make billions of dollars.
So if you want to be a millionaire, graduate Harvard. If you want to be a billionaire, drop out.
Exactly.
What's the land in total?
That's a good question. It's a lot.
It's insane. I got lost already.
Right. It's a huge campus.
I wasn't imagining it. I thought it's just a university and that's it.
Right, it's very large. So Harvard's endowment, the invested funds, is like $55 billion. So they just have invested $55 billion in their endowment that they use the money to pay for the university.
В момента ще му покажа как изглежда нашият университет или по-скоро моят университет, който аз съм завършил във Варна, а именно Технически университет Варна. Искам да му видя реакцията. That's my university.
A little different. It's a little different.
That's our lecture hall.
Yeah. I mean, but it still works. I mean, that's the thing. A lecture is a lecture. Harvard is
Depends what they speak, yeah.
Right. Hats around the corner.
Я не знам колко стои такъв свичер. $64 реално е за. Даже имат свичери на Харвард с логото на Nike. Вау. Ще взема една шапка със сигурност и най-вероятно някой свичер. И след това ще се опитам да отида и да питам разни хора дали знаят къде е България. Ще видим дали ще се получи. Малко ще е кринч, ама какво ми пука? Аз съм свикнал. Така, приятели, взех си от магазина една шапка и един свичер. Общо ми излязаха около 100 и няколко долара. След това видях, че има един друг магазин, в който ги продават шапките за 10, а свичерите за 20 долара. Малко се метнах, че дадах 100 долара вместо 30. Но все тая. Крайна сметка, искам да ме извините, че точно срещу мен пече, а пък не искам да съм слънчеви очила. Реално в момента се върнах обратно, тъй като другите Джон, който ни правеше тура, замина. Аз останах сам, исках да поразпитам, както ви казах, студентите дали знаят нещо за България. Питах, може би, около 10 човека, които просто не искаха да ги снимам. Явно тук са по-притеснителни студентите като цяло. Доста от тях знаеха къде е България, чували са за България, познаха ни флага, нали? Това ги питах извън камерата, не иска да бъдат записвани. В крайна сметка не мога да снимам някого без той да иска и без да имам неговото съгласие. Някои от тях ми казаха, че са чували за Стоичков, други ми казаха, че са чували за Григор Димитров. Мисля, че имаше само един или двама човека, които не бяха чували къде е България, така че доста голям процент хората знаеха. Бяха чували за България, не познаха флага, но пък бяха чували за България, знаеха къде е на картата, можеха да ми я покажат, така че с това мисля да завърша самото видео. Надявам се да ви е било интересно, да не е било прекалено отекчително. Не запомних страшно много неща от това, което казваше Джон, така че това видео, докато го обработвам, ще трябва да си припомня точно какво ни казваше, защото бях фокусиран в това светлината да е добре, да се вижда всичко, как ще го сгубя след това и така нататък. Не можах да се фокусирам изцяло върху самия тур, така че заедно с вас, докато гледам това видео, и аз също ще се образовам. Благодаря ви изключително много за отгледането време, приятели. Сега ще се насладя на остатъка от деня. Абонирайте се за канала, за да не изпускате следващите видеа. Оставете един лайк, коментар, критика отдолу, мнение, каквото ви е на сърце. До следващия път. Чао!